Whoever exalts himself will be humbled. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Humility is a tough virtue to acquire, especially, I think, in today's world when we have so many ways where we can do pretty much everything we need on our own. We are a very self-sufficient people. So how do we do it? How do we work to acquire the virtue of humility? Are we to place post-it notes on our bathroom mirror reminding us, don't forget to be humble today? I doubt it, and I don't think that we would be very effective in growing in humility with things like that. One way I'd like to challenge us or to offer us as a way to work on our humility is to think about how we receive criticism and whether or not we do that well or poorly. I'd like to share, as a reflection, a brief story from my seminary days. In the seminary, especially early on, I think I had this image of myself as being tough, a hard worker, a football player, former football coach, and so on and so forth. Certainly not someone who would be dramatic or get caught up in some of the things that go on in a seminary. One day at lunch, I was at table with some of my friends, and I said, I'm not one to complain, but... And in cuts my friend Steve Homan. What are you talking about? You complain all the time. It stunned me. First of all, I was in front of all of my friends, and they all started looking at their food because they didn't know what was going to happen next. But most importantly, I think I was stunned because it smashed the image of myself that I held to be so dear. The hard-working German person. The person who wouldn't complain. And Steve Homan smashed that image of myself. And I wasn't exactly sure what I was to do about that in the moment. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. Argue with him. Tear him down. You know this guy. You don't have to listen to him. And I think that was what was especially tough about the situation, is that I had a pretty easy out. Steve was a friend of mine, someone who I had gotten to know in the seminary, played basketball and soccer with him, and would often see him in the gym and sometimes help each other when we were working out. I prayed with him every day in the chapel with all of the guys in the seminary. And we also had classes together. I was thinking to myself, you don't have to listen to Steve. This is the guy who can't sing and is tone deaf, but still yells when we're singing in the chapel. This is the guy who says things that make no sense in class and who you want to get very frustrated with sometimes when you're sitting there in class. You don't have to listen to this guy, the voice was telling me, because you know him and you know his faults. But for whatever reason, probably mostly the grace of God, I took Steve's criticism and I didn't really say anything back to him. And I actually took it to prayer and took it to my spiritual director and reflected on it and realized that what Steve was saying was true. And I learned from that, and I allowed myself in that moment to be humbled. And it was a thing that bore a lot of fruit in my life. Now, I don't mean here to hold myself up as the example of the person who always takes criticism well, because for every story like that, there are 1,000 in my own life where I did dismiss criticism. Criticism that was probably at least partially true. But I do think we find it hard to hear criticism, especially when it either hurts us and strikes at the heart of something that we know in the back of our mind to be true about ourselves. And it also is difficult to hear criticism well when it comes from those that we know and those that we love. Because we are so easily able to come up with reasons to dismiss what they have to say to us. We can come up with 1,000 comebacks for people who are close to us, our family, our friends, those that we work with. That voice in the back of our head tells us maybe something they're saying is true, but you don't have to listen to them. You know, and you have the dirt on them. I think if we look, though, in the midst of all of the criticism that we hear, barring the fact that barring a situation where it was offered from a psychopath or something along those lines, which we might sometimes be tempted to think our family is, but usually there's always, in the midst of criticism, some grain of truth, and maybe a lot of truth, depending on the situation. Are we people who can take criticism, and yes, granted, it may have been offered in a more clean-cut or a more professional manner, or at a better time, but do we still, in the midst of our frustration with a person, are we able to sit down and sort through criticism that is offered to us to look for the grain of truth that is in that? That, I think, is the biggest way that we can grow in humility, by listening to what other people have to say, other members of the body of Christ. For indeed, if it is other members of the body of Christ, then it is Christ speaking to us. We can also, I think, we have to acknowledge one temptation. Some people suffer from listening to all criticism and do not have the ability to sort through it, and then eventually allow that to wear them down or bring them into a state of depression. We have to be able to sort through the criticism that we receive, and not necessarily take all of it, but also not dismiss all of it. Do we have the time and the patience to listen to what others say and to be able to sort through and look for that grain of truth so that we can grow in humility? One of the most dangerous positions I think that any person can be in our world is to be in a position where no one tells them anything about themselves. No one offers them any criticism. No one gives them any opportunities for growth. May we be people who receive criticism well. And may we, in our difficulties and in the times where we're challenged by the criticism that we receive, may we remember Him who hung on the cross of humility. And may He, in this Eucharist, be our strength to grow in the humility that He shows for us every day.